Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, what have you printed lately? Well, back in mid-March, I introduced you guys to Creality's Ender 3 V2 Neo 3D printer. And I've had a few comments from different people basically saying, okay, so you got the printer, you printed a few things, well, what have you done with it recently? Like, does this thing just collect dust? And I can honestly say that this thing has not stopped pumping out useful projects. I try to steer completely away from trinkets. I steer away from little ornamental pieces. I try to only make things that are functional. So, on today's show, if you're sitting on the fence about a 3D printer not knowing how you can apply it to your everyday life, that's what today's show is all about. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through and show you guys some of the things that I have printed from other people's designs, as well as some of the ones that I have designed myself and printed the prototypes and then the final pieces to get them to work the way that I want. So without further ado, let's see, what have you printed lately? Well, coming in through our driveway of our house as well as into the carport, we have motion sensor lights. A lot of people have them. The problem is that ours is wired to a circuit that is switch controlled because the switches were wired in a time when sensor lights were not a thing. It was just a light that you flicked on. The problem is you get people coming over constantly and they go to turn a light on or off and they flick the wrong switch and shut off your sensor light, and then they turn it back on really quickly once they realize, but then it goes on permanent. So I had to design a solution because it was driving me crazy. And what I designed and printed was this. And guys, it is just a switch cover that is printed with clear PLA, and it covers up that switch perfectly. It uses existing bolts, existing mounting bolts for your switch cover, and it mounts over top to cover up that switch so that you cannot accidentally flick it on or off. But what if you have a power failure and you need to flick that switch on or off now to reset your lights? Well, I've placed in the top and the bottom a small hole in my design that allows you to take a wooden toothpick or a skewer or a small dowel and just reach down and give the switch a little poke, and you can still turn the switch on and off. However, though, nobody can flick it on and off and mess up your sensor lights. So there you go. This thing here has made it so that my switch has not been turned off ever since I printed it. Well, you guys remember that Per Gear sent me out the 10-watt laser conversion for my 3D printer, and that thing works fantastically. However, what do you do with the laser head when you're not using it? The laser head in the cover, I mean, it just sits around. Simple solution? You 3D print a case. That's what you do. You 3D print a case. And guys, with some careful measuring and designing in Fusion 360, I was able to make this custom case that securely holds my laser in place, protects it from anything around it. You know, if it's sitting in a drawer or even on a shelf, you're not going to knock things over and damage your lens. Perfectly protected, perfectly held in place there, and just another use for the 3D printer. Custom cases for anything that you might have. Well, at some point in time, my wife decided that she wanted to make herself a greenhouse. It basically consisted of a glass cabinet with glass shelves that she wanted to install full-range grow lights in. The problem is that the grow lights mounted on the bottom of those glass shelves with double-sided tape. And number one, it was an eyesore, but number two, it gets warm in a greenhouse and that tape eventually lets go and the lights would drop. So what do? You got a 3D printer, guys. What I did was I duplicated the corner brackets that are in this existing shelf, and then I extended them with a square bracket on the end that was designed specifically to hold the grow lights. So with that done, you get a 2-in-1. You get a bracket that holds your light and it also holds up your shelf, and it worked fantastically. Now it took me a few times to design it to get the prototype just right and just the way I wanted it, but that's all about learning. And with the Fusion 360, there's a big learning curve there. That is a very complex bit of software, but it's free software. And as long as you have some patience and you can take your time and learn it, you can design whatever you want. Now, the top shelf of the greenhouse is actually metal, the roof of it. So she didn't want me drilling into her cabinet. So what do? Well, you've got the 3D printer. So I designed the exact same bracket sort of thing that held the light for the lower shelves, except I changed it up a bit to hold a rare earth magnet in it, and they just magnet to the top of that cabinet. Everything holds perfectly in place, and I can say that since these were printed and installed, my wife was happier with the installation, the lights have never dropped, and her plants have never looked better. Well, the next 3D printed project actually brings us over here to the bandsaw. And guys, as some of you already know, my bandsaw has the spring-loaded centrifugal bearings for guide bearings and thrust bearings that have this little knob here that tightens and releases. The problem is, in most cases, I have to do it with my fingertips. I'm not getting any younger. My hands just don't have the strength sometimes that they used to. So I printed this. And what this is it's a wrench, a custom wrench that allows me to loosen or tighten this. I 3D printed some knurling in the side as well as a recess for a 1/2-inch rare earth magnet. And this piece just sits here right over top of your bearings, and you can just like that, release them. Very easy on the hands, very easy on everything. But why so long? Why so long? It initially wasn't this long, and then my original prototype actually ended at this line right here. The problem is, while it worked great for all of these adjustments, at the bottom it was a little bit tricky. So I needed the extension to be able to get in there and access the bearings at the bottom. But either way, guys, this thing is fantastic. You can set your bearing and a quick little twist with your hand and you are done. And with the rare earth magnet embedded right in the handle, you can click it wherever you want there on your saw for storage. It's always there within reach. It's just another great use. It's not a trinket. Now we're making tools. Well, another tool for the shop, and quite possibly one of my favorite things that I've made so far, is this little beauty right here. Now guys, in the past you've seen me where I have mounted my used scroll saw blades to the side of my scroll saw arm using magnetic sheets that have labels printed on them. But I've taken it one step further, and I have taken the most common sizes that I use, and I have actually 3D printed their names right there in the plastic, right in the PLA plastic. This was actually printed in 2 different pieces and then glued together using CA glue. But we have number 2, 3, 5, 7, and spiral, and it mounts with this bracket that sits right over top of my scroll saw arm, all custom made. And it's held in place right there with 4 embedded, very small 1/8 diameter rare earth magnets. And while the magnet sheets that I used before were perfect, there was nothing wrong with them, the problem was that sometimes the blades dangled down below the arm, and while I was wiping off my saw, I would bump the blade and the magnet would release and blades would go everywhere. I don't have that problem now. It's way up top. If I want to wipe down the top arm, I can just lift this out of the way and I can snap it right back in place. My blades are right there, very accessible. I can see exactly what they are, exactly what size they are. This has been one of my favorite things that I've made so far. This is awesome. So a little while back, I went to use my GoPro with the tripod to be able to film some stuff for a show, and I noticed that my tripod mount was broken. Again, guys, it's no trouble. This this right here, this tripod mount is not my design. I can't take the credit for it. I got this one off Thingiverse and it's absolutely incredible. I really like the way it works. I like its beefiness. I like the way that the camera mounts to it and feels so secure. But this one here, this is my design. And while it looks a little boxy, it is absolutely perfect for what I use it for, which is a gooseneck mount for the camera for things like when I'm doing lathe work or when I'm cutting at the scroll saw. I did have another one that I made on the show here using ABS plastic quite some time ago, and while I did like it and I used it for years, I was never really 100% satisfied with it. But this model here that I designed and made is much beefier. It's not going to break here in the shop. It holds my camera securely, and I really, really like how it turned out. So the GoPro mounts that you can make are absolutely endless. And I will, as time goes on, be making more and more of those because I find that I use the GoPro camera more and more in here for little screen-in-screen shots and that sort of thing. So there you go. GoPro camera mounts is another thing that Kenny's been printing. Well, out here in the shop, I like my music. And I have a little Bose speaker that I like to listen to it through, but it's always sitting around. My phone, which my music is on, is in the opposite end of the room. So I came up with this. And this is another piece that I designed. It's quite a sturdy stand for both my Bose speaker, just like this, and as well my cell phone. So if I'm listening to music out here, which I so often do, everything is all in one place and I don't have my phone on one end of the bench and my speaker on the other. I still have access to my top control switches here for volume, power, etc., etc. And it's a great little unit. Well, my wife saw this and she liked mine so much that she asked me to print her up one, but she wanted her cell phone to mount sideways. So I ended up having to change the design a little bit and reprint it, but it really wasn't that big of a deal. I was able to print them up with little to no effort, and the more, of course, that you use the design software and the more products that you design and test and prototype, etc., the better and faster you get at doing this. So there you go. There is my speaker and cell phone stand. Well, when your wife has a ukulele that is kind of a resin thing and she wants to add lights to the interior of it, but there's really no way to mount it, but you have a 3D printer, what do you do? I can tell you what you do. You design some brackets to make a switch to be able to mount that control circuit inside the ukulele so that you can just reach into the sound hole and turn the lights on. It's very, very cool, and it's kind of a novelty fun thing, but it made my wife happy. So a little bit of designing, a little bit of toying around with it to make sure that things fit, and as well coming up with a way to mount it to the inside of the ukulele that was non-destructive. That was key. That was very important. So non-destructive mounting to the inside, and you get a fun little I don't even know what you'd call this, but if it wasn't for the 3D printer, I don't think I would have been able to do it and do it as nicely as what I did. So the 3D printer made something like this totally accessible to me, and it just took a little while for me to learn to design the components to make it work, and the more I design, the better I get. So I went so far as to not only do it for hers, but I have one of these outdoor ukuleles, they're called, as well. We take them camping. And I had to add the lights to mine as well. So I guess this summer while we're camping, we'll be sitting around the fire with our illuminated ukuleles having a little bit of fun. But it's pretty cool. Well, as you guys know, I have an X-Tool D1 Pro 20-watt laser. And I use the honeycomb when it comes to cutting. Not so much engraving, but for the cutting that I do on the laser, I use that honeycomb. The problem is that you can't get that thing centered in the whole mounting of it every time. So what do? Well, you print some brackets that hold this thing centered and perfectly in line every single time. And that way you can utilize the measurements on this thing to be able to place your pieces for cutting. It is a spectacular use of the 3D printer. And honestly, guys, this is not my design. I did not design these. Somebody else did, again on Thingiverse, but it works so well there was no need for me to design anything else. So there you go. There's another thing. Tool accessories for your other tools. So here's another fun one for the shop. You've got this long steel rail here for the fence of my saw stop, but it's an empty tube. So why not remove the end cap and print yourself a small little drawer, in my case to hold my tilt box or maybe a pencil or whatever. The drawer goes back quite a bit. So you can mount whatever you want in there. But like I said, for me, it's the tilt box. So when you're changing the angles on your saw, instead of this being an end cap and useless, now it's a drawer that you can get your tilt box and adjust your angle on your saw without having to walk all around the shop. And there you have it. What have I printed lately? Guys, this is just a fun little video. Just a video to show you that my 3D printing adventure and my learning of design software is still ongoing. And I'm having a great time with it. It is a lot of fun. And if you guys haven't made a decision yet, or you're sitting on the fence as to whether or not you want a 3D printer or whether or not you think you would have a use for it, your use for the printer is only limited by your use for new gadgets and your imagination to come up with solutions for the gadgets that you need. As I said earlier, I am doing my utmost to avoid trinkets. I don't want trinkets lying around, little figurines printed and that sort of thing. I don't want it. I have no use for it. But do I have use for a scroll saw blade holder, or a tool to help me with my bandsaw bearings, or a case for one of my laser heads? You're darn right I have a use for all of that stuff, and I have been able to successfully design and print them. So guys, what are you waiting for? If you're sitting on the fence wondering if this is the road you should take if you want to get into 3D printing, you can do it fairly inexpensively. And even if you don't go the V2 Neo road, even if you go with a different 3D printer, this isn't about the printer that you get. This show is showing you that with a little bit of an imagination, with some free design software, and taking a little bit of time to learn how to manipulate that software, you can come up with some pretty cool designs that are both inventive and extremely useful, both in the house, in the shop, heck, even in your car. You can make whatever you want. All you need to do is try. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in this week. I hope you've enjoyed today's show. This one's been fun, kind of reminiscing over the things that I've printed since March. And I can see, like when I look at the timeline between the things that I designed and printed at the beginning and the things that I design and print now, the improvement in my designs and in my methods, I can see it. You guys may not be able to see it because you don't know the timeline, but the things that I struggled with on day one, I do not struggle with now. And now I'm at the point where I can pretty much design whatever I want, and I only have to look up a few things from time to time when I really don't know how to do something. So don't be intimidated by this. Don't be afraid of it. Jump in with both feet and have a bit of fun. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in this week. I hope you've enjoyed the content. If you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. You click the bell and then you're not going to miss the notifications of future episodes of the program. Guys, I hope that you've enjoyed the show today. I hope that you're going to try this for yourself and that the show is maybe giving you a little bit of a push to go towards something that you thought you might want to try, being 3D printing. But more importantly, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another Alternative Tuesdays.